Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dorothy here from CCMA. You're very welcome to our Tuesday CCMA community chat. Delighted to welcome you all once again. A new topic this morning, and you'll see on screen there Niamh from WSI and our guest speaker, Nolan, who is a lean guru, I think we can say, Michelle, which hopefully we'll all be by the end of this webinar. But I think it's a topic probably we haven't spoken about in the last number of weeks because we've been focused on other things. But from speaking to Michelle over the last few days preparing for today, it's very clear that companies still need to be doing lean, looking at processes, looking at reviewing processes and looking at collaboration. And we all know it's a little bit more difficult in the way some of us are structured at the moment. But I know from looking through Michelle's presentation, she's going to give some very valuable insights as to how we can still continue to operate in a lean environment and how collaboration can still take place, albeit that people are not physically together in the same room. So we're going to give you another couple of minutes or another minute just to log in. I see people logging in there. I'm just welcome to all. And while we're waiting, just to remind everybody that we're in the middle of our CCMA member survey. And that's going to be a really valuable piece of research, looking at what companies are doing in terms of working from home practices, policies, procedures they put in place, and then also looking at companies' plans to reopen contact centres where they've had to have everybody work from home and work remotely. And we'll also capture some really valuable benchmarking data, so things like our average attrition, absenteeism rates, valuable data for all of us. So just to say to anybody on the call whose company has not already signed up to complete the survey, if you could get in touch with me after the call, I'd really appreciate it, to dorothy@ccma.ie. Because we're hoping to get this completed within the next week or two and provide very valuable data to all of you as you plan to reopen your facilities. So it's 11:02. I hand over to Michelle. I'll let her do the introduction. Thanks, Michelle. As always, really appreciate your time and really looking forward to this event. So I'll hand over to Michelle. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dorothy. And welcome everybody, and thanks for joining, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. As Dorothy just said, I was sitting listening to some of the recent webinars and thinking actually every organisation that faces customers probably has pivoted on a sixpence over the last few months, and will need to continue to do so as things evolve. And one of the things I'm very conscious of is a lot of businesses, their revenue stream is down, and when revenue goes down, you need to reduce your cost. So what I wanted to do was to suggest a couple of tools that people might be able to use. You might have used them before, you might never have heard of them, and then how to do that in that virtual environment. Before I go into that, a couple of things about me. So just to introduce myself, if you haven't met me before, I have been working in the change arena in lean for probably the last 20 years. Before that, I was an accountant. So I've worked in business optimization and cost reduction for big name companies like British Airways, JP Morgan, Microsoft. I'm with Bank of Ireland at the moment. I've been with AIB and ESB. And I previously was a judge for the CCMA annual awards. So that's how I know Dorothy and how I keep in touch with the CCMA. And the wonderful work they do. So before we dig into it, I wanted to do a poll just to get an idea of what is going on for people. And the poll, and Niamh will put it up there. 3 questions. Who has a cost challenge at the moment? Who needs to reduce costs as a result of the pandemic? And this just will give us an insight into the state of things as they are. So if you can answer that.
That's up there now, Michelle. So I see the...
Okay, I can't see the poll, so apologies, guys.
Yeah, so the answers are coming in at the moment. So we'll just give it another 10 or 15 seconds and then I'll be able to give you the results.
Super, thank you. And I'll just write down the answers, so I'll just get my paper out. Just give you another moment to do that.
Yeah, we're just going to close it out now. So got 22% saying yes as soon as possible.
Yeah.
56% saying within the next 12 to 18 months, and 22% saying that they're fine, that they're okay.
Okay, so actually that's 3/4 of people need to do something about cost. So it is everyone needs to keep their hand on the cost pulse all the time, but I think the pandemic has accelerated that for a lot of people. So if we go on to the next slide, if we look at traditional cost reduction levers, and I've done a summary here of the big ticket ones that I've worked with over the years, and this is structured left to right in terms of the levers that are available that companies generally use, what kind of saving you can generate from it, how fast it is to implement, how much it costs to implement, and how it impacts the customer. And from left to right, the one that is quickest, easiest, fastest to do is and cheapest, and that the customer loves, is process optimization or process improvement. And there are all sorts of reasons for this, which I'll come to in a minute. But before we do that, I want to move on to another poll, and this will give me another flavour of where you're at. So, quick question: has your organisation run a lean programme or an initiative in the last 3 years? Yes, and it's ongoing. Yes, but it's no longer running, or you've stopped.
Great, so that's polls there now at the moment, and the answers are coming in. So again, I'll just give it 30 or 40 seconds, and then we'll be able to see the results.
Okay. And I guess the reason I wanted to ask this is lean is something that comes in and out of favour, if you like. So at one point in the 90s, everybody was running lean programs. They're less fashionable now, but there are some organisations where they're very deeply embedded. So you get a variety. But what we've seen happening in the last few years is a lot of lean techniques or lean thinking have come into other methodologies like Agile. So if you are using Agile in anything you do, you'll be using a Kanban board, daily huddles, things like that. They're all lean techniques.
So yes, the results on that then, Michelle. So we've got 25% saying yes and it's ongoing, 25% saying yes but it's no longer running, and 50% saying no.
Okay, so we've a mix on the call, but most people don't have anything going on at the moment. So that's helpful for me because that tells me that there's more that can be done. Okay, so just to recap for those of you that haven't come across lean before or haven't looked at it in a while, what is lean? And lean is very simply a methodology and mindset to provide value to the customer. And the idea behind lean is, unless you have a customer that wants your service or process, there's no point in the service or process. The customer really doesn't want to pay for waste. He doesn't want to pay for anything that doesn't add value to him, and doesn't, it just doesn't wash. So that is the very simple philosophy of lean, and it's really about eliminating waste. And it, as you may know, it originated in Japan, in Toyota, and it was originally called the Toyota production system. And because it originated in manufacturing, it took a long time before it started to be used in service businesses. And what you will find if you go out to try and hire a lean expert, until probably the last 5 years, they were all engineers. So they were people who have been trained in manufacturing and in engineering. But what's happened in the last 5-10 years is a lot of universities now offer lean masters and so on. So you'll find people who have backgrounds in service that can apply lean techniques to any business. And so if I look at what are your processes like, and I guess this is something that, this is a slide and it's not my slide. I was given it by a master black belt a number of years ago, but I just use it all of the time because it actually, people tend to say, oh, my CUSAT is okay, my effort score isn't bad, what's the problem? But actually there's a very big gap between the perception and the reality of processes. So most of the top left-hand corner there, companies think, well, actually our processes are okay. But when you go on the ground, the reality is it's probably a big bowl of spaghetti, or very often a big bowl of spaghetti, unless you're managing it very proactively. How should it run? should be a lot better, but actually how could it run if you stood back and went, actually, what does the customer want? How do we get it to the customer as fast and as easily, as quickly we can, whether that is a service, a query, whatever. That's really what we should be all targeting for. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a mathematician to say, well, actually, the bottom right-hand corner costs a fraction of the one above it. And that's the simple philosophy behind Lean. So another poll. So this is something which, you know, I'm working in a bank. It faces lots and lots of customers, and we're all over our CustSat, our effort scores. So I'd be interested to know what has happened to your scores in the last 3 months, because the pandemic has just given us so many challenges. So has it improved? Has it stayed the same, or has it gotten worse? And we just give that a minute.
Yeah, so that's there live now as well. So again, we'll give it a
Great.
Just give it 10 more seconds.
Yeah. And I guess the thing to think about is, if it has improved or worsened, why is that?
Great, so we've got the answers here now. So 43% say it's improved, 43% stayed the same, and 14% say worsened.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And what that says to me is, actually, in organizations where it's improved, your existing process was probably pretty good, but what you've been able to do in the pandemic is really utilize your staff. So you must have well-trained staff, very passionate about the customer, who know their onions, and they're able to turn in a sixpence. So that's a really, really positive piece. So if Lean is all about what processes that benefit the customer, how do you know what your customers really want? So for those of you where your effort scores or CX scores have worsened or stayed the same, here's a little exercise that you could do to help you start to think about what can you do differently to really delight your customers. And this is a simple Lean tool called the Cano model. And to do this, and usually you'd workshop this in a room with post-it notes. We can't do that at the moment, but what you do, you get your team, whatever it is or whatever the service, list it out, and also say how it will be delivered. So what are the services that your customers want and need, and how do you deliver them? And the thing about these services or products, if you like, that you're offering the customer is that they change over time. So what would have been relevant to your organization and to your customers before Christmas has changed. Absolutely. So you need to do this exercise every so often anyway. You particularly need to do it when you're launching a new product or service, about how do you do that, how do you get to the customer, but also in times of extreme change, it's a good thing to do. List out all your services, classify them. So in a room, you would be taking post-its. So you'd have your list of post-its with all your services or products, first of all. Then you stick them up against a blue, green, or red curve there in the diagram. And then you stand back from it and go, okay, of the delighters, how much are we doing? How much of our effort is on those delighters? And how much of our effort is on the dissatisfiers? And what you need to do is shift your effort into the delighters. So you need to develop an action plan and how to expedite that. So, and that's quite a simple piece of work to do. It's a very simple diagram, and people get it. And it's very illuminating to people about, actually, I spend a lot of my effort on stuff that the customer really doesn't give two hoots about. Let me stand back and look at what else we can do. Now I'm just going to move on. So that's the first one. The next piece of work, and this is something, again, you can workshop very easily with team, and I've done this with a number of teams, and it's an eye-opener. And one of the reasons I like this is that people go, oh, we can't do a project at the moment, we're way too busy, we've got too much going on. But actually, if you took an hour or two with the team and said, okay, well, what are the wastes that we have going on in our organization or in our team or in our services, and how can we reduce those or eliminate those. So of course there's a nice acronym for these wastes, and Lean they talk about 8 wastes, and the acronym is Tim Woods. And you'll see the 8 boxes there, and what I've done is I have put little examples of what those wastes might be in a contact center or a customer service environment. The classic thing is paper forms traveling around. That's a waste of time, effort, and so on. So what you would do is you would take this with your team and you would ask them to each list out wastes under each category. And some categories they might have a load, and others they might have next to none. And then you look at those and you put an action plan around how to address those. It's very simple. It's a very, very simple, straightforward tool to use. People love it because actually people working in contact centers, service businesses, they hate all these things that are a waste of time. But this gives them a platform and a forum to look together and to talk and to agree how to move forward. So very simply, workshop this with the team, get them to list out all the wastes. Then you look at what can we do about all these wastes to reduce them or eliminate them, and put that in an action plan. Very simple piece of work. Okay, if I move to the next slide. So the next piece is about behavior, and this calls to manager behavior. And I would assume that most of the people on the call are probably manager level. And this, there's we all hear that, walk the talk and lead from the top, but actually as managers, there are, the Gemba concept is really key. So Gemba, and you can read the slide there, Gemba is about managers walking through the processes and going, actually there are opportunities to improve here, and working with people on the shop floor, so to speak, or on the contact center floor to do that. So when you get onto that shop floor, we talk about Kaizen. So if you think about, and most contact centers will have Kanban boards or daily huddles, that's a Kaizen behavior, that's a Kaizen technique. So Kaizen basically means improvement, but it's continuous improvement driven by the people doing the actual work. So a daily huddle where you got around the board and you go, actually, here's the workflow coming in, here's what needs to be done, here's what we anticipate, here's who's got more, here's who's got less, let's rejig it. Here are the improvement activities that we want to work on. That's all Kaizen. So you're probably doing it anyway. So, but the piece that I will add on to that is the plan, do, check, act, which is the deeming cycle. So this scientist in the 50s, I think, developed a guy called Edward Deeming developed the deeming cycle. And if you put a structure around what you're doing here, so you plan it, you go and do it, you check that it's happened, and if it hasn't happened the way you anticipated, then you act, you refine the results. That is the cycle, the discipline you need to put around any lean improvements. Because basically, until you've run a cycle, you don't know you've got the benefit. So actually, the piece after any initiative you take is to monitor the results and watch them. So as managers, you need to do the Gemba piece, which is about actually what were the results, discuss them with the team, what went well, what didn't go well, how do we refine that, and that's the lean management behavior. Now, I guess lean, while I'm a big advocate of lean, some of this behavior historically wouldn't have had a great press, partly because of what developed in GE with Jack Welch. But actually, if you look at how it works in Japan and how it practically works, where it's now embedded, if you like, in the agile project management practice or project delivery practice, it doesn't have to be like the Jack Welch experience, if you understand me. Okay, so you go, okay, well, there are three tools that, thanks Michelle, I like to look at those. They're 3 nice tools. How can I do it? We're all working virtually. We can't gather in a room. How do we do this? So if you have, and everybody has a different kind of setup, managing virtually, a lot of organizations will have virtual collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams or Google Docs. However, I'm kind of conscious that if you don't have those, it can be quite difficult. There are a number of tools out there that you can do a free 30-day trial. I haven't tried all these tools, I'll be honest with you, because we're using Microsoft Teams where I am. However, they're worth exploring, and it's a good thing to do to give someone in your team to say, actually, we want to do a bit more collaboration. How do we do it? And go and explore some of these and see which one we can make work. If you are running any session, it's no point saying, guys, we're going to have a session, we're going to set it up, we're all going to get together, and we're going to do it on the Kano model or with the 8 ways, and it'll be great. That's not enough. You actually have to appoint somebody who is going to be the facilitator, who will direct the process, run the agenda, point people to the right things, close down debates or discussions that aren't pertinent, and moderate it, basically. So you need a facilitator, you need a very clear objective from the workshop or session, and before you set up that session, or when you set up that session, have the follow-up date in the diary so people will know they will have to commit. And additionally, when you are running the session, before you close out the session, agree how you're going to manage it going forwards. Are you going to use a Kanban board? Are you going to have a weekly check-in? How are you going to do that daily huddle while we're all virtual? So agree that virtually at the first session. So there are virtual tools out there for Kanban boards, and the one that we use where I am is Jira, and it's a really super tool, but again, you mightn't have access to it. But long before Jira, I was using spreadsheets till the cows came home, and it worked perfectly fine. Most companies now have some way of sharing documents, whether it's Google Docs or whatever. So a spreadsheet in a shared location that everyone can view works absolutely fine. The thing about it is just the discipline of going back and being relentless about, actually, we need to make this better.
Michelle, just can I interrupt with a little question, or not a little question, a question from Jeff. Well, she's Jeff, I shouldn't be calling it a little question. He asks, do you use RACI charts for managing the outcomes of your planning sessions? I have to say, I don't know what an RACI chart is.
That's a Reiki or a RACI, depending on what part of the country you're from. So you can use, yeah, I mean, ideally what you do when you come out with your 8 ways or your Kanban is, okay, what actually am I responsible for? What am I accountable for, or who's accountable for it? Who needs to be communicated to, and who needs to be just kept informed? And that's what RACI stands for. So I use them depending on what I'm doing. If it's something very straightforward within a small team, I don't, it's usually a no-brainer about what needs to be done. If it's a bigger piece of work, then yes, absolutely. I think if you have people, one of the things that underlies any of this change work is the stakeholder assessment. And if you're doing a proper hefty project, you will do a stakeholder mapping at the beginning. And when you get through the project, then you will get into RACI at some point, if it's a bigger piece of work. If you're talking about a team or a couple of teams, and you just want to do something quick to eliminate waste, do the 8 wastes. And you will do that without really having to do a RACI. Does that make sense?
Maybe sure it does.
Give a thumbs up.
Jeff is, yes, he said yes.
The important thing then, regardless of what you're doing, is no matter how small the win is, celebrate it, recognize it. There is nothing that builds momentum better than celebration and success. So that is the thing I would remind ourselves to do, because it's been difficult. It's been really, really difficult in the last few months, and people need to hear the positive stuff. My last slide, I'm going to talk about the WIFM, and some people may have heard this term before, but it stands for what's in it for me. And if you're working in a change arena, and if you want to make a change, or you're trying to get people to do stuff, you need to think about what's in it for them. how does this impact them? And there are usually 5 areas to think about when you're communicating the benefit of a change. So, you know, you might go to your team and say, I want to do something on waste because we're under cost pressure and I want to take out any unnecessary work. And that might frighten the living daylights out of some people. And so what I added in here now, which you can see on the slide, is the Fisher curve. John Fisher, in the early, I think he came up with it in 1999 or something like that. And this is his diagram describing how people cope with change or the process of transition. And I think we've probably all been on this curve multiple times in the last 3 months. But actually any kind of change, whether you're trying to do an organizational change, a process change, whether you're moving house, starting a new job, whether your kids are starting school, whatever it is, this curve sums it all up for me. So I guess when you are engaging your people in change, think about where they might be on those curves and how they might react or feel about what it is you're putting in front of them. So and when you present it, do it from the point of view of, actually, the customer is going to love this, because the customer is really hacked off at the amount of time it takes to get through the call or to get wrap up or to get confirmation of whatever it is they've asked us to do. So when you present these benefits, you say, actually, what would the benefit be to the individual? What would the benefit be to the team? What would the benefit be to the organization overall? What is the benefit to the community at large? And what is the benefit to the customer? So when you do these, when you're trying to get buy-in to these changes, think of it from those 5 angles and think about where the people that you're trying to get to change might be on that curve. Hopefully we're all on the, you know, gradual acceptance. I can see myself in the future bit on the curve now, given where we've been in the pandemic. But I'd say there's quite a few people that are sitting down, still in the depression bit, or still feeling a bit threatened by it all and frightened about what the future holds. So I guess and in a team, you will get people who naturally will always be the positive person saying, yeah, let's go do it. And then the people who will really struggle with any change at all, even if it's moving desk. And so you need to bear that in mind with any change you're doing and how you move it forward. So that's my whistle-stop tour of a few lean and change techniques which should benefit your customer. We've a few minutes left if there are any questions. If you have other stuff you'd like to know, I have a wealth of resources I'd be happy to share. Contact me on LinkedIn, or there's my email address. I believe the whole presentation and the webinar will be up on the CCMA website later on. So it's there to refer to or send on to anybody afterwards. Have we any questions, Dorothy?
I'll kick off with one, because one of the things we talk about people needing, and that was great, thanks Michelle, needing to review the process given where we all are now and the change in the way contact centres are operating. Like I've been very impressed by a couple of companies who've been proactive. So for instance, I'm an FBD customer and I got my one for all gift voucher of my refund of €35. I know it's not a huge amount, but it was actually, I thought it was a great thing to be proactive about, rather than me having to ring in and say, well, what are you going to do? You know, is there going to be a reduction to my insurance because my car's been sitting outside for the last 2 months? So do companies need to be thinking a little bit, and I might not be dramatically outside the box, but thinking about that positive, proactive type of customer service? Absolutely.
And the companies that, so if you think about when you're doing lean training and on the Kano model, the example they usually use is on car. So this was a tool that was used to develop products, and in car manufacturing, if you just take the example of if I was developing a car now, 30 years ago it would have been to have a radio in the car would be delighting people. Now you have to have the full high-tech thing, but things like, you know, your heated seats and your adjustable mirrors and all the rest of it. So if you want to be ahead of the competition, you need to be thinking, actually, what will really delight our customer? Giving them a refund without them having to ask. Offering them a review of their account before they ask. Checking in to say, how are you doing? Can we help you with anything? We've been looking at your usage patterns. they're up, they're down, can we offer you a better package? Those kind of things, and you know, or even streamlining your IVR as people come in, because I know anybody calling a contact centre at the moment goes, God, am I going to sit there for 20 minutes because volumes are up? Find ways to reduce that call wait time. Those things, absolutely, people should be looking at, and it's what customers are looking for, and it's what differentiates you.
Yeah, no, I must say I was impressed. It was nice to get it. I wasn't expecting. I'd seen it in the paper. I'm conscious of time, so we've only another couple of minutes. Just on that model that you've brought back up on the screen there. So a company now going through this process, our contact center, I was surprised because you know the way sometimes with Net Promoter Score we often talk about go back to the detractors, so and get to the root of the problem so you can find what the problem is, to the detractors into promoters. But what you're saying with the dissatisfiers is that's things that you are doing that's dissatisfying the customer. So just look at what that process is dissatisfying the customer. It's not sort of ignore that customer.
No, and I guess the example I would give, we tend to spend a lot of time in organizations problem solving, and actually what can be better is to look at what would good look like. And the example I give is British Airways. When I worked for them in the 90s, at the time when they were losing, I think it was 26 bags per 1,000. And when those bags were lost, they were really lost. And BA spent a lot of money trying to figure out how to fix that problem. And eventually what happened was, after several years of this, somebody stood up in the room and said, actually, we're approaching it the wrong way. Why don't we think about what would we need to do? What kind of process would we need to create so that no bags ever get lost? And that shifted the whole thinking in the organization about handling lost bags. So I guess stand back from what you're doing. So, you know, it's not enough to fix problems. So BA, when it was thinking about lost bags, was thinking about how do we handle the customer query, and how do we handle the complaint, and how do we do refunds, and how do we do compensation, and all that. And that was what their effort was on, how to fix the problem. Actually stand back and go, actually, what would a fabulous process look like? What would really delight the customer? And that, what you will find in that is it'll save you money, because you're not having to put in supporting processes like handling complaints or compensation or resolution issues. Fix the process by creating a dream process. Now it sounds very aspirational, but actually, if I go back to that diagram with the how it could run, if you have that in mind with any process, then you know that cuts out a whole heap of cost for you, but it really, really drives customer satisfaction. And if you think about customer effort score, if your internal effort is that big spaghetti bowl of the reality as is, if that's what your staff are having to do, then it must be really hard for the customer too. So you can see straight away the correlation.
Yeah, I think, and I know we've done customer journey mapping workshops before, and I know member companies would say, oh, they got a huge benefit, and it's back to your post-its and drawing them up. But given that processes have changed now because they've had to change because the contact center, everybody isn't physically in the one place, I think it is for people now to walk the customer's shoes. I even know my local coffee shop, I was in there only yesterday, and the process is completely flawed in terms of people queuing and obviously trying to up the protocols. Yeah. And the running, it was making people get stressed just waiting for their coffee. I had my 13-year-old with me, and she was sort of saying, why has he got all these people queuing? Like he was letting too many people in, you know. So you're even in those things, you're looking, saying there has to be a better way of doing this, a simpler way.
And one of the key, so lean, it is about the customer. It's absolutely about the customer. The other thing about lean is it talks about process flow. So where you have a process that goes backwards and forwards or left to right, that is not flowing. That bottom right-hand example I have there that is a very streamlined flow process. It's low cost, it gets the customer what it wants straight away, and it's low effort for everybody involved. And
I'm conscious of time, Michelle, so I'd say we might, I know myself and yourself could probably chat about this for a long time. So can I just say, always, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
useful models there. You've put your contact details. If anybody, you know, if they haven't captured them and they want to get in touch with me, I can obviously introduce you to them. Just a reminder to everybody, we have a webinar tomorrow, sponsored webinar with BT with Dr. Nicola Millard, who, if you haven't seen before, is a phenomenal presenter in terms of the future and futurology, and she's talking about the autonomous customer and all the things that are changing with customer perspective. So I think that's a very valuable webinar. So the details are on the website. It's at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And just once again to remind you about the survey, if you haven't already contacted me, please do. We'd really appreciate your support on that. So Michelle, thanks a million. I know you're letting us put a presentation up on the events page, so that'll be up later today with the recording. And great to see you, and thanks again. Thanks everyone. Take care. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.